Okay, we're going to continue with our discussions regarding philosophical theology or the philosophy of religion. And in today's lecture, we're going to consider the problem of evil. So far, we've considered the arguments for the existence of God. We started off giving those arguments, then we gave some criticisms of the arguments, and in some cases, defenses against the criticism. Today we're going to begin with an argument from the non-theist side, and that argument has to do with the problem of evil. I'm now going to give you the problem of evil, and you should write it down because it might appear on your final exam. Number one, if an omnipotent, omniscient, and all-loving God exists, then evil cannot exist. So again, number one, if an omnipotent, omniscient, and all-loving God exists, then evil cannot exist. Number two, evil does exist. Number three, in the conclusion, therefore, an omnipotent, omniscient, and all-loving God does not exist. So let me give you the argument again. Number one, if an omnipotent, omniscient, and all-loving God exists, then evil cannot exist. Number two, evil does exist. Number three, therefore, an omnipotent, omniscient, and all-loving God does not exist. Well, the word omnipotent means all-powerful, and omniscient means all-knowing. So, if an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving God exists, then evil cannot exist, the argument could also say. Now, what does this argument assume? Well, it assumes that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving. Secondly, it assumes that if God has these attributes, then the existence of evil would be impossible. Now, I want to give a defense of this assumption. Say, for instance, I saw a man as powerful as me assaulting a child in a parking lot, and I did nothing to stop him, and you saw me. Then I'd rightly be considered a cold-hearted and uncaring person from not stopping the man from assaulting the child. So the question naturally arises, doesn't God have at least the amount of moral responsibility to stop evil from occurring that I do? In fact, doesn't he have more responsibility since he is all-powerful? Then how can God be all-loving for failing to stop what I'd be obligated to stop? Now, some have attempted to defend the existence of God against the presence of evil by claiming that God really isn't all-knowing and or all-powerful. They say things like, God cannot know how a person will choose whether to act in an evil way or not. Well, that's true. I didn't know what the man would choose before he assaulted the child, but when he did assault the child, wasn't I still obligated to stop him? Wouldn't God still be obligated to stop him? Or they might say that God doesn't have the degree of power necessary to prevent evil from occurring. But I can prevent evil from occurring when it's in front of me and I have the means to do so. Why can't God do that? Thirdly, this argument assumes that no special circumstances apply to God for not preventing evil to occur. And fourthly, it assumes that no good purpose could exist for allowing evil to occur. Let's talk about evil in general. There are generally two recognized forms of evil, and you should write these down because they might appear on your final exam. First of all, there's natural evil. So write that down. And natural evil is defined as evils that occur as the result of the processes of nature. So natural evil is evils that occur as the result of the processes of nature. Earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and so on, those are examples. The second kind of evil, which you should write down, because it might appear on your final exam, is moral evil. And that's defined as, and you should write it down, evils committed on living beings by persons. Evils committed on living beings by persons. Murder, theft, rape, crimes like that are examples of moral evil. So one way of putting the problem of evil is to ask, how can an all-knowing and all-powerful and all-loving God allow natural evil to exist, or moral evil to exist, or both? Now, the attempt to justify God given the presence of evil is called a theodicy, and you should write this down because, again, this might appear on your final exam. Theodicy is spelled Theodicy, theodicy. And here's the definition you should write down. Theodicy is the attempt to justify the goodness and existence of God given the existence of evil. So again, theodicy is the attempt to justify the goodness and existence of God given the existence of evil. Now, the standard theodicy for moral evil is that moral evil is the result of the exercise of human free will. So, God is not responsible for people exercising their free will to act in an evil manner? Is that what that means? But is an all-powerful and all-loving God required to prevent persons from accomplishing the evil they freely choose to do? That's another question we could ask. Like me preventing a man from assaulting a child in a parking lot. The answer given is that if God thwarted all evil acts, he would effectively stifle people from using their free will, and that would create a greater evil because that would rob them of using their free will, effectively making them not free, maybe even like robots. Another argument along these lines is that by creating people with the capacity to choose, God thereby also created people with the capacity to choose good and not just evil. And creating the possibility of people choosing to do good outweighs the harm done by allowing people to choose evil. So that argument goes. Now, there are arguments against the free will defense. One argument against the free will defense is that free will allows people to commit evil on a colossal scale, like a Holocaust or enslaving millions of people. Why can't large evils be stopped by God, but minor ones be permitted? That would still allow free will to occur. Another argument against the free will defense is that someone freely choosing to commit evil can do something that God doesn't permit himself to do, namely deprive someone of their freedom, like a kidnap victim or a torture victim. Why would God allow an evil doer to rob someone of their freedom when he, God, doesn't allow himself to do that? Another argument is that why doesn't God immediately reward freely chosen good actions and immediately punish freely chosen evil actions in order to encourage people to act in a good fashion and not in a bad way? God could still do that and still allow people to be free. Another argument denies that free will exists, or that even the idea of free will makes sense. But that's another argument that's kind of out of the purview of the philosophy of religion. So that's just moral evil. What about natural evil? Human free will doesn't seem to be responsible for that. How are the goodness and power of God and his existence reconcilable with the occurrence of natural evil? One argument is that natural evil is the result of original sin. Remember the sin that Adam and Eve supposedly committed in the Garden of Eden. But is that a satisfactory answer? Who decided that hurricanes, floods, and so on would be the consequence of original sin? Apparently God did. How is that consequence just? Another argument is that natural evil is a way of punishing groups of people, many of whom disobey God. But is it fair that these natural evils should include the innocent, like children, as well as the guilty? Another argument is that natural evil is actually caused by another being, a malevolent being, like a devil. But we must ask the question, who created this being? And if God created this being and he's all-knowing, then why would he create a being that he knew would cause natural evils to occur? And if God is all-powerful, why wouldn't he prevent this malevolent being from causing natural evils? Also, what's the proof that this malevolent being even exists? So these are some of the problems raised regarding moral evil and natural evil, and Theodicy attempts to answer them. But there's another argument that's been raised in the history of philosophy. It's called the best of all possible worlds argument. And the argument was put forth by the philosopher Leibniz. We've discussed Leibniz before. Here's the argument. Number one, God is perfect in every respect. Number 2, a perfect God would make the best possible world. Number 3, if this is not the best possible world, then God is imperfect in some respect. Number 4, and finally, therefore, this is the best of all possible worlds. So, what Leibniz is doing is saying is that however you define God, God's going to be defined as perfect in every respect. And a perfect God would naturally create the best possible world. But if the world that we have isn't the best possible world, then that would mean that God is imperfect in some respect and wouldn't be God. Therefore, he concludes, since God must be perfect by definition, therefore this is the best of all possible worlds. If we accept the assumption that God is perfect, then this argument tells us that it's impossible to create a better world than this one. Then that means it's impossible to create a world that excludes the possibilities of evil, both kinds of evil, natural and moral evil. The world is as good, or this world is as good as it gets. Now, there have been some criticisms of this view over the years. One was offered by the philosopher and writer Voltaire in his book Candide. He basically argues in Candide that there is just too much suffering in the world to justify the conclusion that this is the best of all possible worlds. It's easy to conceive of a world which would be better, that would have less suffering. A second criticism with the best of all possible worlds is a best of all possible worlds cannot exist because it's always possible to imagine a better one, like a world with the addition of one more good person or the subtraction of one bad person. So imagining a better possible world isn't that hard to do, and it seems like it should be possible. Thirdly, the third criticism, if this is the best of all possible worlds, then people choosing to do evil is a necessary condition of the world. But if it's a necessary condition of the world, then how can it be said that those choices to do evil resulted from free will? So that's all I have to say about the problem of evil. Thank you.